Nerds, I have Josh Weil, who is running for U.S. Senate in Florida. He was on the show before, but he's back because this might be the first time we're doing an official endorsement consideration interview in the Nerd Zone. So, hello, nerds.
Hello, nerds!
How you doing, Josh?
Doing great. I'm glad to be back. This is fantastic. Glad to talk to you and the nerds again.
I love it. And I think you shared last time. Are you a teacher as
I
well?
Yes,
Yeah.
still teaching. I'll be going on leave of absence at the end of May. So teaching high school math.
Wow. And how what grades? All grades in high school or
No, so my course load is actually I have sixth grade, and then I
mm-hmm.
have pre-calculus and algebra two.
Got it. How are the kids doing with return to school and being in person again? They must love it.
I don't have them. I've been virtual. So I transferred to virtual
Oh.
at the beginning of the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
I had actually put in some paperwork and was supposed to start in virtual that August of 2020. And then
Mm.
that all got sped up and I wound up starting in April. And so I've been working from home with virtual school students here in Florida, which is how I have the mix. So our secondary math teachers, each of us have one of the three middle school grades, and then we have a distribution of our high school courses.
Got it. And the pure virtual students, is that because they have some medical concerns, or is that like a new option for just anybody that wants to
In
do it?
Florida, we've had a statewide virtual system for more than 20 years.
Wow.
Actually, around 11 years ago, I think it was. I think it was around 2011. Florida Virtual School became its own school district because it was large
Hmm.
enough that in order for them to try to retro balance the funding, it had to be made its own school district. And so they are one of the 67 school districts in the state. And then they have franchises throughout just about every district. So, what franchises do are they allow essentially each school district to have an office with a local office with their own administration and teachers. So that way they can conduct local testing and have meet local needs with parents and students as well. And keep a larger percentage of the money in house because whenever the way the it's a very retrofitted model and the funding is really wild. But essentially, what happens is, in order for these students to be funded, the any student in the state that takes it, their funding that would have gone to their local school district is transferred to the Florida virtual school funding. And so for part-time students or for local students, it's a way to essentially keep more of that money in the school district, in
Mm-hmm.
the local school district. So essentially only a small percentage of it is being paid as like a platform lease rate. Um,
Got it. Got it. Yeah. And
so I
what's the
work
main
for
motivation for
well,
students who
it's
want to do virtual?
it's always been there as an option. Having
Mm-hmm.
virtual schooling has always been an option. It's usually been about 60-40 in terms of part-time students, those retaking classes, trying to take additional
Mm.
classes to get ahead. Math is a very common one when you look at how many years of math you need to get through or get to and through your AP calcs. And when you start
Mm-hmm.
high school math, like you have to kind of double up, do extra, try to jump ahead at some point. So virtual has always been an option for students for that. Um, we're definitely now stronger. We have a greater majority of students that are full time due to the pandemic and those who
Mm.
have wanted to stay home or needed to stay home. Um,
Got it. Well, Josh, you sent me a mail, or your team did a few weeks ago, saying, "Hey, does the Nerds for Humanity show endorse candidates?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know if we like officially endorse candidates. Certainly, uh, we have the Of the People platform, which is powered by approval voting, and anyone is an open platform, and you're on there, and anybody who's supports you can go to ofthepeople.us and approval vote you there, so
and
you up
and
on the
do
trend.
please, if you haven't
Yes.
yet and you support me, go to Of the People and approval vote.
Yeah, because actually, is today Sunday? Yeah, tonight I think it's 8 p.m. Pacific. I'll be donating $100 to one of the top 5 trending candidates on Other People. So if you, and that's based on recent approval votes. So if anybody wants to support Josh to be eligible for that contest, go to otherpeople.us. However, I also said, well, I would consider endorsing a candidate, but then I would want to, talk about some specific things. And I said, I sent you some questions like, hey, well, I'd want to know why you're running. What are your top 3 priorities? What are some recent votes that you would have voted on and why? How are you different from the leading candidate in the race? And what data do you have that suggests that you have a shot? And I'll be honest, when other people have asked for my endorsement, that usually they don't reply to those questions because it's work. But you actually replied. I was like, oh, okay. So I wanted to have you on the show now to kind of go over those topics with you. And then we can also have the audience ask questions as well. So it's, everybody can get to know you better. So how's that sound to you?
That's great. Fantastic.
All right. So the first question was, an open-ender, which is like, why run for Senate in Florida? And I'll also add some more color to that because it's not going to be an easy race to run and win because it's such a big market, such a big media market. And you do have a very strong not only competitor in Rubio if you got to the general, but the primary, you've got Demings, whose name has good recognition from when she was being considered for VP. And so I'm curious, why make the go at it? It seems like a high mountain to climb.
It is. It's a big mountain. And I mean, that was part of, I guess, the excitement for me at the beginning, is knowing that this is the type of challenge that I could absolutely run full speed on. There would never be the need to feel like I needed to hold anything back, which is a bit liberating. And and I work in a field where, unfortunately, you would think that educators and administrators in school districts are about, yes, do everything. And the most successful superintendents, principals, teachers, every level of school is about, yes, we have to do everything in order to, make the greatest impact and best serve these kids. But far too often, it's not. Far too often, public schools are political. You have school boards that are publicly elected officials. Everything is funded with taxpayer dollars. There are, future elections and careers on the line. And, it's about data management. I've seen far too often school districts, wanting to not do too much this year because we need to leave ourselves room to continue to grow next year, because we're being looked at how many years we can, make at least 1/6 of or 1/10 of, our gap growth and achievement. And if we do too much this year, we might not be able to hit it next year or the year. Like, there's far too many games in place holding us back from helping the kids. And it was exciting for me knowing that it was a service opportunity, that the state is so big, I could never do too much. Why I chose this race, there's just so much need. I as someone who considers himself a progressive, and who I would say the most exciting thing that has happened in my life, as someone who spent most of my life in Florida in politics, was probably the Andrew Gillum race. Obviously the 2008 election with Obama, had incredible national excitement and people were fired up. And I actually didn't live in Florida at the time. I was back going to college in New York, finishing up my bachelor's there. But man, what Gillum did here in Florida was tremendous. And knowing that progressive policies were popular in the state, that every time we bypass our, Republican controlled state legislature and our Republican governors with ballot initiatives, right? Which is where we put directly on the ballot for 2/3 of the state to approve, 65% yes is needed that we can pass new state legislation, put things directly in the state constitution. Those pass over and over again. That's how we passed medical marijuana and expansion. That's how we raised our state's minimum wage. That's how we got reinstatement of voting rights. Progressive policies continue over and over again to succeed by large percentages statewide. And yet there continues to be this idea that only moderate candidates win. Even though there's no evidence to that, moderate candidates lose. The more moderate candidate tends to lose a race, whether it's the Republican or the Democrat. It's, moderates don't get people excited. And I knew that we needed a progressive, and I knew that there wasn't going to be one. Whoever the Dems chose, because I filed for this race back in December of 2020, whoever the Democrats chose, I knew was going to be, they were going to build their campaign on trying to raise the most money as possible. Raising the most money as possible means getting lots and lots of money from corporations and lobbyists, which means you're going to have an incredibly watered down neutral platform if you have one at all. You can't have a big money candidate supporting Medicare for all, because how are you going to support legislature that's going to effectively end the insurance industry when you're taking all this money from the insurance industry to fund the campaign? Those big money campaigns support the status quo, and the status quo doesn't work for people. So I knew that there would always be that advantage. And God, the emotions of 2020, man, with going through the last year of the Trump presidency in a pandemic, watching Bernie have it, and then watching the Democratic Party just, go through this, if not a legal, unethical collusion to, knock him off and secure the nomination for Biden. And then just having to wholeheartedly get behind Biden, because it felt like, God damn, Trump was going to kill us all if we didn't get someone else in charge of this pandemic response. And then, the losses in Maine and Iowa and South Carolina after those Dem challengers were leading substantially in the polls in the days going in. Lindsey Graham was practically like writing his, giving off his resume for, lobbying firms that wanted to, employ him come January in the days leading up to the election. I don't think anyone was more surprised that he won re-election than he was. And that, God, like, now we need a miracle in Georgia just to have 50-50 in the Senate.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got a miracle in Georgia just to have 50-50 in the Senate. We're so close, but 50-50 in a tiebreak only works for the Republicans. Like, we knew we wouldn't be able to make substantial change because the Democratic Party is far less unanimous in their vision. The Democratic Party is incredibly diverse in terms of, how they want to help, where they want to help, what level they think they should be, who should be responsible, how much you want to fund it, how much comes back to your state, how much will go to, look, California is going to have more need than Colorado. So will senators from Colorado support programs that disproportionately benefit California when California has disproportionate amounts of need? It doesn't necessarily mean the senator from Colorado is against it, but they're going to want different guarantees in it. It's much harder than when you have a Republican Party that's geared up for obstruction, destruction, minimalization, wholesale corporate gain, because we're all going to blatantly take money from the corporations on the other end. Yeah, like I knew that we needed to expand, and we needed to expand with progressives, and I could not just ride the emotional roller coaster again. And if I wasn't going to see it here in the state, then you know what? I would throw myself at it with everything I had, because I knew there would be a response. I knew that people in Florida want a progressive. They will get excited about a progressive. And so off we go.
So Josh, you have a primary coming up. Do you see yourself as do you see the other folks in that Democratic primary as not progressive?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say that I am clearly the progressive candidate. Recently, we earned a big nomination from PDA and P4DA, Progressives for Democracy in America. Um, we earned from the statewide Florida group. We earned that endorsement, I should say, not nomination, which has clearly differentiated me from any other candidates in the pack. A number of candidates refused to even come in and interview because they know what they are. If you don't support Medicare for all, you're not a progressive. Like that, I think is our clearest line. If another way that I've heard put great from some of our national progressive leaders, I think Mike Fox, who is the head of PDA in Florida and is part of the national team, put it that if you're not willing to put your principles or your policies over the party, then you're not a progressive, right? If you're willing to put the party first over the needs of the people, you're not a progressive. And anyone that I think is saying in this housing crisis that they're not willing to risk, going into battles over state rights. They're not willing to risk, having, dealing with the talks about socialism. They're not willing to risk losing money from big real estate and developers and contractors in order to champion some form of HUD expansion that gives, greater federal oversight and regulation into the housing market for rentals and sale prices and helps expand a stronger national infrastructure of municipally owned or state owned or federally owned housing that can be insured to be affordable for varying levels of the community. Like if you're not willing to make substantial change during what is an untenable crisis that is affecting more than a third of the country, over 100 million Americans at this point, then what are you doing? Like why are you even in this race? We know that we need Medicare for all. We know that people can't afford their prescriptions. We know that people can't afford their health care. We know that more than 40% of Americans are carrying some level of medical debt. And if you're not willing to address these problems for people, then what good are you?
So, Josh, we've talked a little bit about healthcare. There's a lot of problems facing the country that are going to come before the U.S. Senate over the next few years. What do you think are your top three priorities, or would be your top three priorities? And if
For
you had to
healthcare or
stack
overall?
and if you had to stack rank them, like what would be number 1, 2, and 3?
This has always been hard. This was something that when we did our first campaign kickoff with an event here in the Lake Nona area of Orlando, that I was asked and I struggled with because I struggle with it the same way Jimmy Carter did. And Jimmy Carter talks about this in his White House diary that anything that is a truly pressing need of the people shouldn't be deprioritized. And, I hate the political need to hyper focus or make it easier to market by saying I'm about A, B, and C. And we're not going to talk about D or E because, it's too much or it waters down the message or confuses people. We'll save those for, the next campaign or 2 years down the line or, the next Congress, because the needs are all there. And I think what kind of made it easier for me is I try to wrap as much of it as possible into human rights. Human rights is my number one concern. Um, and anything that is a human rights issue, I think, has to be addressed in the moment with utmost importance. It can't be kicked down the line. Um, and I guess I'll pair that into three parts by saying social justice, healthcare, and environment. Um, I think all of those are essentially human rights issues. God, if you watched SNL or the Weekend Update segment of it last night, they had a pretty brutal joke. Um, well, first off, there were a lot of jokes about Florida, which is fair, but don't think it goes unnoticed. Um, One particularly because the mayor of the city of Miami is trying to make Miami the Bitcoin capital of the country or the world or whatever. They want all paychecks and everything to be Bitcoin and it to be like a main currency there. And the joke of it was it's actually perfect because just like Bitcoin, Miami won't be around in 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the environment, if you live in Florida, the environment is an incredibly pressing issue. Climate change is an incredibly real threat. Florida has twice as much coastline as the state of California. The percentage of the state that gets affected by rising tides and coastlines and encroaching coastlines comes up to, I think, about, we're going to lose close to 80% of the state um, as tides rise over the next 40 years. And, Florida is going to disappear. Um, Preserving the environment, increasing, what we do. What is it? There it is. I have the number here. I had sent you 1,350 miles of coastline across the state. Um,
Mm-hmm.
the state's almost entirely coastline. We have to invest in renewable energies. We have to increase those capacities. We have to decrease our carbon input. We have to replant and move and rebuild the barrier walls and the mangrove forests and the reason why we're getting hit by, why we're having greater hurricane impacts every year. The erosion that we've done to the Everglades and the coastlines, we've just destroyed this. We have multiple areas that are affected throughout the state by sugar burning from the sugar industry down by Okeechobee. We have a Nestle water bottling plant that makes I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. The number is something ridiculous, like 1 million bottles of water an hour come out of it, and the CO2 off gassing from that plant, from the bottling, is outrageous. We have incredible ground pollution in the areas surrounding it. Not to mention all of the water that they're pulling out, the fresh water that they're pulling out essentially for free. They pay $135 annual fee to renew their right to pull as much water as they want out of the ground. Um, we've seen in this last year, Piney Point, that the state continues to pull away all of the money for resiliency that the local communities have in terms of responding to environmental threats. They continue to lower the thresholds in terms of safety and security checks for any of our plants, any hazardous materials, anything that could affect the waterways or the water supply. And then on top of it, just like we saw in Flint, Michigan, they make the fine so minimal that it's easier and it's more financially inducive for the companies to not um, ensure and not be cleaner and safer in their handling of toxic chemicals or supplies or gases, because it's more financially suitable for them to pay the fine than it is to spend the money on doing the right thing. Um, so it's become a cost of business to take risks on behalf of the people. And we saw that when the line broke and we had contaminations in the water supply outside of Piney Point here in Florida last year. So environment is a huge issue that affects human rights. This is gonna if Florida sinks into the ocean, we're talking about a state that's gonna have 18 million displaced people. Like, is the rest of the United States ready to accommodate that? Do we have anything in place for that if we're not handling the environment or what people are going to go through?
Josh, let me interrupt you for a moment and share what I think you would hear from Republicans about that topic. And they would say, oh, look, this guy is trying to punish all the job creators and he wants to shut down the sugar plant and make it impossible for a business to compete. And oh, by the way, like all this climate stuff, it's either not really happening, or if it is happening, it's China and India's fault. So why punish the business person in Florida is pointless.
You're absolutely correct. The Republicans in this state love to deflect and blame China anytime that there's a real issue that they want to address. We've had severe thunderstorms at an historic rate. Severe thunderstorm warnings that coming through this year, eclipsing last year's historic rate of severe thunderstorms tearing through the state. We have real environmental problems that impact Florida, and absolutely no plan because the party in charge is completely dismissive of it. Yes, they love touting job creation in terms of cutting taxes, bringing companies in. Why? So they can exploit our workers. That's what it means, right? When you're saying that you want to bring companies in because, the benefit that they can have, well, we all know that the number one cost for nearly every business and industry is human labor. And, when we had to circumvent the state because the state legislator refused to raise our minimum wage over $7.50, and we had to go to the people to get it up to $10 an hour, and raising annually to 15 over 5 years. So this October, it'll be $11 an hour, right? Their response in the next legislative session was to try to create a sub-minimum wage and classes of people who could be employed for less than the minimum wage, right? So they're not bringing good jobs in. They're not bringing jobs that pay enough money for people to afford to live. The cost of a 2-bedroom in Orlando, Florida right now is $1,800 a month on average in Central Florida. $1,800 a month for a 2-bedroom. A single parent would have to make $32 an hour in order to budget that out at 40% of their take-home pay. So beyond what is responsibly expected people to budget for housing, 40% of their take-home pay in order to be able to have a 2-bedroom for them and their child. And when you start talking about, well, they should be working second jobs, you have to remember that for a single parent, what you clear from a second job is the majority of it gets eaten up in childcare costs because we don't have systems in place to help take care. Public education primarily is a result of the labor movement. I mean, the creation of compulsory education in this country was primarily instituted as a result of the labor movement after child labor laws made it so that way factories could no longer employ young children. And then they found themselves in the rough position of, well, if we want to employ both the husband and the wife, if we want to get both people working for us from the poor working class families, we've got to do something with the kids. And so let's get the government to pay for schools to put the kids in so that way we can have the workers there. It doesn't work. There's nowhere. You can't have the parent, if you have to pay for childcare out of what you're making on a second job, then it decreases what the percent that you're actually taking home and the value of it. Yes, many people work second and even third jobs. I don't know a single teacher in the state of Florida that I've met, and I know lots of teachers, that doesn't have either a second job or B, a spouse that makes considerably more money than a public school teacher, because it just doesn't work.
Josh, on this topic, have you had any reaction to prospective constituents about basic income? Like, is Florida, it doesn't strike me as a place that would be open to that kind of idea, but I don't know, maybe
Well,
I
your
don't
state
have
politicians definitely are not. I would say that over the last year, UBI has become much more popular and understood by the people. I think that the reworking of the child tax credit into monthly checks to help working parents has really helped reframe the issue and make people see, one, the value of those monthly payments, and two, the feasibility of it coming from the federal government. To yes, where I think that UBI has gone from a pipe dream thing that progressives talk about to a real thing that residents across the state want to have real conversations about in the year 2022.
All right. Well, mindful of time, let me move on to the next discussion topic, which is probably the hardest one. And this is the one where, when I've asked other candidates to share their opinions with me, they kind of they have the quick elevator pitch on why they're running, but then when I'm like, well, what are some recent votes that happened in the Senate, and how would you have voted on it and why? Some people struggle with it, but you came back with some answers, so I put them on the screen here. Why don't you walk us through a few of them and your rationale and why you picked those votes and why you thought they were important and how you would have come down if you were voting.
Okay, so now I have seen a number of articles on David Weil, who, was struck down by the Senate for being the administrator of the Wage and Hour Division for the Department of Labor. Obviously, because every time that we're searching through and doing our media runs on Weil, WEIL, these things keep coming up. But yes, I would have supported this. They were what we ultimately saw was we saw the two senators from Arizona and one more, I want to say possibly Manchin, were the ones who voted against it. David Weil, as I'm just looking at some of his things here, one of the biggest things that people were upset about him was the idea that federally we should be enforcing wage and hour laws, which, some people don't like. That's the type of thing that the people in Florida don't like. Again, when you're talking about bringing jobs in and what's attractive to big corporations, well, strong labor laws and labor unions and making sure that employees are taken care of is not attractive to big corporations. So yeah, but I would have supported David Weil in that respect. Unfortunately, he lost 53. I had another key point on it and can't find it right now, but I would have supported David Weil for that. I thought that he would have. The arguments against him, I thought, were either unfounded or things that did not upset me at all.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing about the federal kind of wage and labor rights approach, it seems like it's similar to what we did internationally, I think, with a lot of other developed countries on a minimum corporate income tax, in that it avoids competition between the states to just keep lowering the taxes for corporations to try and attract the jobs there. And if you say no, like there's actually a federal minimum wage or there are federal minimum standards, then Florida and Texas don't have to keep slashing, their requirements, because ultimately, like, they all want to attract companies to put jobs in their states, but they sometimes end up giving away the farm to those corporations. And you see this with
we see it in Florida all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. All the
And you
time.
wonder,
That was
like,
huge
well,
under
okay,
Rick Scott.
you have like this winner's curse. It's like, well, if you actually got the company to come over here, it's probably because you gave away everything, and what's left for the citizens, right?
Oftentimes, what we see in Florida is we see a short-term gain from it moving in terms of new construction, and what it brings to developers and contractors and real estate zoning. Because if bringing in areas of new jobs allows retailers to build around those areas, and new homes, or bringing in, again, like new retail chains or organizations allows you to then, again, build new homes around those areas and what you're building up. So we see it kind of link around all of this new construction and what's coming, but ultimately it's more of the same in terms of, we're a right to work state, which means it's incredibly difficult for labor unions to succeed. They're given very little power, low funding. They don't have the ability. The larger the corporation, the easier it is for them to essentially force and strong arm an existing union into having to accept poor negotiations, because anything stretched out. The union doesn't have the money to ride things out on long, prolonged court battles or court challenges. So, yeah, it's overall, it's not good for the working Floridians every time. So the short-term gain is always then met by a long-term hurt because that's what's attractive to them. Long-term, it will benefit them. The short-term cost, moving your company, is expensive. It's got to be a long-term gain from exploiting the labor situation that makes it worthwhile. And so if you're a Floridian, no, you do not want to be long-term exploited.
Let's talk about the next vote, which is a little bit counterintuitive. It looks like this was a vote to disapprove the CDC from making requirements on masks in airports and things, or tell us a little bit about that one.
Okay, so this was a joint resolution providing for congressional disapproval of the rule submitted by the CBC related to requirements for persons to wear masks while on conveyances and at transportation hubs. So the CDC tried to say that people in tight enclosed spaces need to still be wearing masks because while our numbers are low, in case you haven't noticed, they're not zero. And if they're not zero, that means that if we get too excited, they can go up again. Like, that's why we've had multiple waves. It hasn't just been one ever rising mountain. It's been up and we get things better, and then we screw up and we go up again. So the CDC wants to still this. Congress disapproved of this. Congress does not want the requirement for persons to have to wear masks on airplanes or on buses and so forth. So yes, I believe the Congress should be supporting rules to maintain public health. I would have voted against the disapproval.
Yeah, I guess the other thing is, I presume that it doesn't. If the CDC were granted the right to make these requirements, it would not preclude the CDC from adjusting them as the numbers came down further. So it's not like anybody saying we need to have masks forever in airports, but
I mean,
it should be
let's
probably
be
driven
real.
by the data.
Like, every one of us has had like a cold, sore throat or been sick after being on a plane at some point. Like, we probably all should have been wearing masks on planes forever. Like, it would have been better, not worse. The fact that we still have, a globally infectious pathogen out there, if you're going to be in a controlled tin can with 230 other people for 3 hours, not a bad idea.
Yeah, it is pretty crazy how I remember before COVID, sometimes people with the flu would still come into work, and then everybody else would get sick, and we all knew it, but it's like, oh yeah, we all got sick. But now when you calculate, if you do care about economic productivity, these sort of transmitted diseases and viruses are probably not great for business either.
No, you should want your employees to stay home when they're sick. Yeah, the idea that we have all been kind of trained to feel pressured to, that there's a warrior mentality of suck it up and working anyway, even though what you're doing is you are bringing your infectious disease to the place you work to share with your coworkers. And, taxing your body while, it's trying to give as much energy as possible to your immune responses to handle this. No, like those are all bad things. That is not the signs of a healthy, ideal society.
All right, the third one was about the post office. And I've heard, some of my Republican friends would say, oh, we don't need the post office. We should just use private options because they're more efficient. And, why doesn't everybody just use FedEx? Like, what's the big deal? What's your take on the postal service?
So I think that during COVID, it's made it clear to all of us how essential the post office is. I think that we've definitely learned and seen, and the thing that I'm constantly reminded of, the more I think about it, is that the postal service is a service. It is not a. It is a. It does a good job of funding itself, through the sale of stamps and what we're paying for it as a business, but it is a service because we need to remember that if you are in, and we have this in Florida, we have small parts of Florida, right, where businesses do not want to invest or put offices. We have parts where there is not a UPS store or a FedEx store because it is not profitable. There aren't enough people mailing things in or out of these small towns. And
Mm,
so and it's what we've seen too often is that if you trust a private corporation, right, to maintain a service that will be profitable overall, they will ultimately switch and only maintain the parts that are micro profitable. It's the problem that we have. It's why we don't have high speed internet all through Florida, because Comcast became Roadrunner, became Bright House, became Spectrum, was given all of the contracts, and they refuse to go to areas. We have over 1 million Floridians who don't have high speed internet still and haven't throughout the entire pandemic while children were trying to do school and people were trying to work
mm.
from home, because Spectrum says it's not profitable to run to these areas, even though that's what they promised when they were given the statewide contract. Um, so yeah, like we need to have government services for these things. We need it for healthcare. We have parts where there are no emergency rooms, where emergency rooms are closing down because the for-profit hospital says it's not profitable to run an emergency medical center here or 24-hour care. And but that doesn't mean that people don't need an emergency room. We need to make sure that whether or not it's profitable, essential services are provided to all Americans across all of America. Um, and that means high speed internet, that means access to emergency health care, and that means the postal service. Um, the one thing I didn't like about this was that, because for reasons that you cannot explain to me, that no one can explain to me, that will make sense, because I've followed it all and I understand why, and it's absolute garbage. Louis DeJoy is still the Postmaster General of the United States of America. And so, unfortunately, HR 3076 also included a plan to limit the transition of electric vehicles and purchase a large fleet of gas vehicles that would be amortized over like the next 40, 50 years, ensuring that we're going to continue to have gas vehicles in the post office as a result of this spending, which was definitely the silver lining to this cloud. That was frustrating and could have easily been avoided by um, ensuring that he had been terminated by now. The fact that
Mm.
he's still in there 16 months after Biden's inauguration is unacceptable.
Yeah, those kinds of decisions could definitely affect the transition to more renewable sources of transportation energy for sure. You gave a bonus answer here talking about you would have voted yes on now Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson. Was that a hard
Yep.
call for you, or what did you
No, that
think
was
of
not a
her?
hard call at all. She was clearly the most qualified of the last three, probably the last four Supreme Court justices that we've seen. I personally am not a huge Gorsuch hater. I have no problem with Gorsuch on the Supreme Court. I think that um, how often Republicans are upset with him because he's not showing himself to be a clear party line Republican is much like our Chief Justice,
Roberts?
Justice John Roberts. Thank you.
Hmm.
Is Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Neil Gorsuch tend to be listed as conservatives on the Supreme Court because they were appointed by Republicans. But both of them, I do believe, put the the true interpretation of the Constitution and the equity of people ahead of political parties. Um, Whereas I cannot say the same of a Brett Kavanaugh or an Amy Coney Barrett. Um, so yeah, I do think that she's an incredibly qualified candidate, and I would have wholeheartedly supported her. I loved her responses. I love just in comparison compared to what we saw in both the Kavanaugh and Coney Barrett confirmation hearings, her composure, the
Mm.
way that she handled insane, ridiculous questioning from some quite unhinged Republican senators. I thought she did a phenomenal job, and I'm looking forward to her presence on the bench.
All right. The last two questions were how are you different from the leading candidate? I think you already covered that in terms of focusing on what you define as human rights and being, very progressive and not taking a lot of corporate money. I'm most
Any.
interested, yeah, any. I'm most interested in the last one, which is like, what data do you have to suggest that you have a shot? I mean, there's so many interesting progressive candidates out there, but they don't make it, and they kind of get overlooked in the primary usually, and the party has already picked who they want, and there you go. Um, what makes you think you could even be on the ballot in the general?
So I've been saying this lately. If you had put me in charge of Val Deming's campaign, and I don't mean this as like as a progressive if I was running her campaign, I mean as her political opponent, like as her
Mm-hmm.
opponent in the primary race, if I was able to maneuver her campaign, it would
Mm-hmm.
not look very different than what she's done herself. The Val Demings campaign has been, is no secret, has been quite a mess. Their spending numbers show it. While they continue to raise, they spend so much money on advertising in ways that is counterintuitive to what you're doing. When you're spending money on TV ads, if you spend 2 million on TV ads in a primary race as a big candidate, the expectation is that you're doing so to raise more than 2 millions in funds. And she
Mm-hmm.
has been a net negative in terms of how much cash she has on hand with every FEC filing. So while she continues to raise money, she's spending more money to get that money than what she's getting back. And it's not moving the needle at all. In fact, her polling numbers against Rubio are worse than they were before. Um, she's finally just started going out and visiting places like in the Panhandle and talking to people, but she cannot attract a crowd outside of local Democratic organizations. So, outside of the people who are already invested and are part of the Democratic Party, who are excited to say, oh, a candidate is coming to see us, with all of that money, she still cannot attract a crowd. No one is coming to see her outside of like the local Democratic Party that she's speaking to. Um, and that's a problem because, again, people are not excited for her candidacy. She has no platform. She has no following outside of the Democratic community. She is not engaging people. She does not have a lot of volunteers. She does not have a ground game. Um, it's everything that I could have hoped for as I position my campaign to compete with her this summer, leading up to our August 23rd primary. Um, Now, in terms of on my campaign, how do we capitalize on that?
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing that it's been, which is that we're looking for a break, because while we haven't raised enough money yet to be able to get our message out to millions of people, we're still getting our message out to people thousands and tens of thousands at a time, which is not enough when we're talking about a primary that's expected to have 1 to 1.1 million um, voters in the Democratic
Mm-hmm.
primary. Our numbers are incredibly consistent in Florida because we divorced the presidential primaries held separately from our primaries on presidential years. So our primary numbers are consistent whether it's an on or off year, and we know exactly what that number is going to be, usually between 1 and 1.1 million. Um, so we're looking at depending on how popular Ken Russell gets and how much the fact that he has now branded himself as the TikTok candidate, where he's got the best TikTok following. And I mean, his videos are kind of entertaining. I'll admit, I can't do an ollie on a skateboard. I trust that the thing I saw him do on a skateboard is an ollie because I was never a skater boy and I don't really know for certain. But whatever it was he did on the skateboard, I can't do that. So, I get like I'm happy for him. I'd love to have TikTok numbers like that. There's nothing to say that that translates to votes. Progressive policies do. What we've seen is that as people want progressive policies because they need help in this state. And, the response that we get everywhere we go across the state is tremendous. We just need a break. And so, if it comes through, a celebrity with 40 million Twitter followers retweeting us, if it comes through, a big endorsement like a Bernie or an AOC coming down the line, or hey, I know that Andrew Yang has watched the show once or twice. If you're watching, right, a big endorsement could help us break through. We've started piling endorsements. They're coming, hoping for a big one from Nerds for Humanity coming up soon. But as the endorsements continue to come, if it's a big endorsement, we essentially need something that pushes us ahead to the next level, that gives us the funding boost. And we don't have to match Val Demings. We learned in Kentucky in 2020, Amy McGrath had raised $71 million going into the primary election day. Charles Booker had raised $5 million, and she beat him by, I believe off the top of my head, it was 0.4 of a point. Progressives make late pushes because progressive money comes late. But the ground game, we have all the policies. We have the policies that resonate, and we're not wasting money on TV ads. So we'll have a strong ground game. We've just got to get the message to the people. And we will go door to door across this state. Actually, I'm going out and I'll be going door to door in about an hour after I leave here. We'll be door to door across this state, canvassing, putting the message directly in the people's hands. And we believe that over the course of this summer, over the course of June, July, and August, we absolutely can get to enough people to just win this thing and take it from Val Demings.
All right, Josh, we only have a few more minutes left, but I did want to hit some audience questions before we wrap up. And this is related to your discussion of, hey, it would be great to get Andrew Yang's endorsement. What do you think about the Forward Party? And maybe I'll add, did you officially request their endorsement, and how's that going?
I have not officially requested other kind of parties like that yet. It's been something that we talked about. I would love to see these parties grow more. One of the biggest questions I get asked a lot by progressives is why I'm not willing to move to a People's Party or a Forward Party or things like that. I am running as a Democrat. And the reason is because we have closed primaries in Florida. If this was an open primary state, I would absolutely consider it. If we had elections like California does, where top two candidates, regardless of party, move on to the general, absolutely. Because then essentially it can be, me versus Val for that second spot. But when we have a closed primary where only registered Democrats can vote for the Democrat and only registered Republican can vote for the Republican, in a state that has nearly identical numbers currently of registered Republicans to registered Democrats, if I was to run on a third party in the general against a Democratic candidate, I would be guaranteeing Marco Rubio wins, because there are not enough votes in the state for those who are going to automatically vote for a Democrat and those who would consider a third party candidate to take away from what the Republican is going to naturally get. There aren't enough votes. So here in Florida, it is the only way to win as a progressive or as anything outside of the main corporate party structure is to beat one party in the primary and beat the other in the general. And to be honest, that's how DeSantis got elected, right? The main party candidate was former Commissioner of Agriculture, Adam Putnam, who was just considered to be the favorite for governor in 2018. And when DeSantis came in and challenged him, which the state Republican Party did not like, he was 20, 25 points down. Trump endorsed him. Overnight, he shot to 20 points up. And, he essentially took out Putnam first, had forced the state Republican Party to support him, and then, beat Gillum by 32,000 votes, in the general, unfortunately. And a loss I'm still not over.
Let's ask you one more question before we wrap up, Josh, from Jonathan. How do you plan to attract voters who aren't progressive? Because there's probably some moderates in Florida who might tip the balance.
There are. I think one of the things is that, we have a good conversation with them. Having real conversations definitely helps to change. What I found is a lot of people who don't consider themselves moderate. So there's I don't want to say a majority, but because this is anecdotal, just from my experience having conversations, there's a significant number of them who are not progressive due to a media narrative. That, progressives are hurting the Democrats in Congress, or progressives are, to blame for something. Because every time the mainstream Democrats screw something up, they blame it on the progressives. We are a familiar scapegoat and whipping boy for them. So, yeah, getting to have those real conversations definitely helps. It's the same way that, we break through with Republicans. Having talked to a lot of Republicans across the state, they don't consider themselves progressives, but they support progressive policies because of need, because they look around their community and they know that $7.50 an hour is not enough. They look around their community and they know that, it's not only Democrats who can't afford to send their kids to college. They know that the cost of college and, many of them carrying the student debt for their kids. We talk about the student debt that kids are loaded up with, but there's a significant number of Republicans who, take on the student debt for their kids, and they see what it is. And, while they disagree with young people having it, they're also trying to struggle to pay that bill themselves. They recognize the problem, and they're not sure. They either don't trust our method of the solution. They've been trained to distrust the government, through some wild voodoo magic of Ronald Reagan, who came out as the leader of the government, telling people to don't trust the government. And somehow that translated into them trusting him to do whatever the hell he wanted. That cognitively makes no sense, but is a real thing that we all watched happen. They've been trained to not trust the government. So either they don't trust the people because they've seen a lot of bad faith actors in the Democratic Party over the years, or they don't trust policies that are coming from Democrats because, it gives more power to the government to solve problems. But they want the problem solved. They're willing to engage in good faith conversations about it. Then there are some Republicans who truly believe, like, they're pro-suffering. And we're never going to beat that. The Democrats who believe that, corporate money should be in the race because why should I have to donate to a candidate? And don't we want our corporation, isn't it better, if corporations are donating and we can trust them to, get the money for us so that way our Democrats can win? Like, you're not going to win them all. If you're pro big corporation, if you are pro suffering, like a lovely lady that I met in St. Augustine who opposed, a system of universal housing because she just thought that, some people don't deserve to have a home or a place to live. Some people deserve to be homeless. I'll have a counter argument to that. You know what? I'm not going to win with 100%. There are enough people who truly want to see problems solved in both parties and in neither party that you don't have to consider yourself a progressive. But if we're going to have real hearts and mind conversations, I do think that they'll come to believe that I am the candidate who will actually work for them and to solve those problems.
Josh, thank you so much for coming back on the show. And we've spent an hour going in quite in depth on a variety of topics. I always was kind of predisposed to supporting you before. And, for what it's worth, I'd like to officially endorse you from the Nerds for Humanity show. And
Thank
I
you,
think
nerds.
you're welcome. I mean, I think the reason is you're willing to go into the nuance. You've got some facts and logic behind you. I love that you're a math teacher. I think we need more people who like math in Congress. And that's right. You bring the factor tree to the Senate. I don't know if how Rubio would do with that, but ultimately, I also appreciate that you have very clear principles, and there's not like a lot of like wiggling around with you. Like you know what you believe. And maybe last thing I would say is to defeat Rubio, because I think he does do a decent job kind of morphing a little bit here and there. Like you probably want someone who is a clear alternative versus someone who overlaps a little too much. And so yeah, who knows? Maybe you beat the odds. Certainly Florida needs it and the country needs it. And I wish you all the best, and hopefully we'll be talking again soon. And if folks want to continue to support you, they can learn more about you on your Of the People profile, which has a link to your website and Twitter. They can also click to approve you. And tonight I'll be donating $100 to one of the 5 randomly. So if you get into the top 5, you'll have a shot at that. I guess a predictive value of $20. But thanks for coming on, and congrats on the endorsement.
Thank you so much. Can't wait. Can't wait to put it up and get that out to the people.
Love it, Josh. Well, good luck out there knocking on doors, and we'll see you soon. Goodbye, nerds.
Goodbye, nerds.
All right. So that was our first endorsement. Oh, and Vaughn says that he's going to donate too. Nice job, Vaughn. I got to jump in a couple minutes, but I did want to do shout outs to people who support this channel, who make these conversations possible. This is not something that, we have a lot of these kind of long form policy discussions with people who aren't always, in the headlines. And so I think it's part of the duty of Nerds for Humanity to kind of spread the word about people that you don't normally see. And one of the reasons that we're able to keep doing this is because we have people who help pay for the cost of the channel. And those are our members. So if you're watching this on YouTube, just click that join link and it'll allow you to support the channel and the operating costs like podcasting, hosting fees, video editing, image editing, those kinds of things for a thumbnail, that kind of thing. So without further ado, let's give some shout outs to the nerds who make this possible. And the first is our highest level supporter, Soldier One, who is our senior vice president. Thank you, Soldier One. Really appreciate everything you do. The next level is our vice presidents. And we'll start with our oldest vice president, Kristen Slevin, then Bike, and Stephen Jones. So thank you to our VPs, Kristen, Bike, and Stephen Jones. The next level are our hardcore. And those are Gene, David, DK, Jekka Lego, Kirsch, Mr. History, Byron, Mona, Susan, Vaughn, who's in the chat, Yang, Tony, Robert, Dean, Statner, Galessa, J. Perrin, AH, Jay Bryan, Vivian, Dana, Jason, Parth, and Daniel. And then lastly, we have our entry level. I think it's just like a couple bucks a month for this level if you're thinking of just pitching in a little bit, less than a cup of coffee. Lisa, Albert, Brandon, Peter, Arez, your mom and Sophia, Mike, Jadwiga, Doris, Emerald, Ben, Rasta, Elizabeth, James, Emma, Hui, Ira, Shoni, Jameson, Doctor, William, Karen, Monica, Ardent, Semery, Mai, David, Brittany, Alexandra, Juana, Warren, Lucky, and Kevin. And overall, who are our oldest and newest members, regardless of level? So our oldest members are Lisa, Jean, and Kristen. And our newest members, our newest nerds, are Daniel, Stephen, and Kevin. And then the last thing I'll share with you is a little bit about the OTP contest. So if you go to ofthepeople.us, tonight I'm going to be donating $100 out of my own pocket to one of the top 5 trending candidates. So this is Josh's profile. But if I go to candidates here, and this is at ofthepeople.us, it's sorted by popular or trending. And this is by the candidates who've gotten the most approval votes in the last week or two. And that's Larry Sharp right now, Christy Seelock, Stephen Houlihan, Jermaine Johnson, and Catherine Fleming Bruce. So these are the top 5. And tonight, if they're still the top 5, one of them is going to get a $100 donation from yours truly. The people on the bubble right underneath that are just eligible, if they got a few more approval votes, are Imani Oakley, Louis Rivera, Dan Whitfield, John Fetterman, and Ali Dalzimer. Josh is in here somewhere. Let's see. He's down here, so he's going to need some more votes if you want him to be in the top 5. You just click on their name, and then you click on this approval button, and that boosts them up in the listing. So thanks for checking out Of the People. And there's a lot of great candidates on there. And it's all designed kind of like Yelp for candidates, just to kind of help you discover people that maybe you wouldn't have otherwise found. And you can even sort by policy, like who are the most popular for basic income. So you can select the UBI tag. And then you can even filter by your zip code to see who's near you that supports a certain position. So part of the People that is possible is because of people who support us on Patreon. So Of the People, it's all volunteer engineers and designers and product managers. We do it part-time, but we do have to pay for costs for like Amazon Web Services and GitHub and things like that, some engineering costs. So in order to pay for those, we have a Patreon page. And if you want to support us on Patreon, go check us out on Patreon. And some of the people who make OTP possible are Eric Sanchez, Tohir, Elizabeth, Tony, Rockout, Iggy, Aaron, Byram, John, Rob, Christina, Timothy, Jessica, Trickle Up, Jean, Muhan, Travis, Austin, Mai, Dylan, Thrive, Brian, Steph, Sujin, Raul, Michael, Nathan, Noah, Omar, Chance, Kimberly, Patrick, Damian, Pat, AT, Pamela, Pat, and Sheridan. So thank you for making ofthepeople.us possible. I'm hoping, lately I found that actually it's starting to show up in Google searches. So if you search for a candidate's name, their OTP profile is coming up. So it's another way for candidates to just get discovered. And if you know someone running for office and they're not listed on OTP, just tell them to list. It's free. You get more exposure and people can discover you and they can approval vote you and you can get shout outs on the Nerd Show as well. So with that, I've got to jump to my next appointment, but goodbye, nerds.